Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you particularly to David for what is truly much too generous an introduction. And I'm now more nervous than I was before I started because I think that I have too much to live up to. But I will try my humble best. When David and George asked me to do this talk, you can hear me in the back, right? When David and George asked me to do this talk, they said they didn't want it to be like a sort of technical research talk, the type that we do all the time. Background, motivation, questions, methods, findings, limitations, error bars, the stuff that we deal with all the time. They wanted something that was a little more, maybe broad brush, a little more for a general but interested audience. And what they said the students want to hear from their professors, because that's why I'm here today, because I am one of the MDP professors, is they said, tell us a little bit about how did you get here? What was the path you traveled? What are the lessons that you can share with the students after 20-odd years in the water and sanitation and development business? And it was very challenging because we go from student to student, class to class, PhD research to PhD research topic, paper to paper. When was the last time that I sat down by myself with a pencil and a moleskin and ask myself, what have I learned? If I had to say something in a short space of time, what would that message be? And I'm still learning, we're still evolving. I'm not really quite there yet, but I can say, this is my life and this is my research, because I think my life and research are still evolving. So I want to share with you just a little bit of my trajectory up until this moment at any rate. And I will be very open to questions and pushback after that. So my talk is entitled, Water is Another Word for Life. Because I think if I did have to say what I have learned, this is what I have learned in the course of the last 25 years. And I haven't learned this on my own. I've learned it through the multiple people that I've interviewed and spoken with and talked with. I've learned it through the MDP students and the ERG students. I've learned it through my colleagues, Cara, Nancy, Jack, so many of you. I've learned it from those whose work I read, who are also here. And over 2 decades, I feel that this is something I can now say with a level of certainty. And it's motivated my work from the beginning, and it motivates my work even now. And today I want to make the case for how I got to that point. How did I get to the point where I actually believe that water is another word for life? So bear with me and come with me. It's now the late 1980s, and this is my very first ever research project. This is the Lunar river system. It is not a very beautiful river as rivers go. It's passes through some pretty boring territory. It's been dammed, as so many rivers have been. It's polluted, as so many rivers are. So you don't really look at the Mula-Muta River and feel the spiritual beauty of the natural world at all, let me tell you. But the Mula River is broken up into 2 large branch canals, Left Bank Canal and Right Bank Canal. And the Right Bank Canal is where I did my work. And as David rightly says, I was totally an agricultural economist at that time. And so I was doing this. What does the crop calendar look like? What does the economics look like of different kind of water governance? What does it mean to be a head-ender versus a tail-ender? And I kind of model the difference that it makes. Does it matter more your location, or does your wealth and land matter more? So this was, I think David was accurate when he said it was nice work, but a lot of people do it. I cannot really take issue with that statement. But my 11 months on this water course transformed me. I came thinking that this crop calendar you see before you, which for those of you for whom I'm teaching participatory development was a very participatorily developed map, I would like to tell you. I thought that people would kind of live and die by the planting season, and of course in many ways they did. And I was working with the water cooperative, and the water cooperative was called Shri Datta. In English it is Shri Datta Water Users Association. And in Sanskrit, it was Shri Datta Jivan Sanstha. Sanstha means society or organization. Jivan means life. So it was called Shri Datta Life Society, in effect. And I started to ask around, is this actually the same word you use, or is this like some kind of philosophical something? But it was the same word. When the water is given to you in a glass, it is not called life. But when they speak about water as a resource overall, they use the same word in Maharashtra. They say Jivan. And they were surprised. You don't say Jivan? And so we had a little bit of a talk about it, and it made me think, like, okay, that's interesting. But after a few weeks, I stopped thinking it was interesting. I felt it viscerally in those villages. I felt it with my whole body and my whole soul, because on these canal systems, you don't have water running all the time. There's too little water for that. So they release it into these villages for a few weeks, then they close off, then they release it into the next villages for a few weeks, then they close off. So rotation by rotation, people are getting their water, and they're waiting. They're waiting. That village or set of villages, they were either waiting for the water or they were using it. Just a few days before the water was released at the head, the marketplace is thick with rumors, flying around. Are they releasing it? What have you heard? I didn't hear anything. Why don't we go and ask? Well, actually, my brother-in-law, he lives 5 kilometers up, and they've just released it there, so I think we're just 3 days down. In about 3 days, I think. The whole conversation is humming. When? When is it coming? When is it coming? And then when the water is released into the canals, it makes a big noise. Whoosh, like this, right? And at that point, the whole village, the water course is transformed. Children are running down. Aye, mom, they let it out. Okay? Mom is rushing out with every storage container known to humanity. Okay? Waiting for her turn to fill up. The pumps are running at night. Hoot, hoot, hoot. Because why? If your turn is in the night, you have to irrigate in the night. You can't help it. And then you're complaining. Okay? It's very expensive, ma'am. You have no idea. I don't like it when the water comes at night because, I cannot do it by myself. I need a lantern fellow to hold the lantern because it's dark. Hey, aren't you doing cost-benefit analysis? Have you got lantern fellow in your survey? Put down lantern fellow. I'll tell you how much it costs. So the whole place, everyday life is waxing and waning. The pumps are running. The laundry is being done because unless the water is running, you cannot do your laundry, or you're waiting for enough water to come because you're not going to use up your rapidly depleting reserves. Okay, to do your laundry. No way, you need that for cooking. The kids are being bathed. The buffaloes are being bathed. Everything is happening. And in some sense, I'm thinking to myself, I really didn't know that night and day sounded different when the water was running and sounded so quiet when the water was not. And the sweetest thing of all, the thing that was the sweetest of all to me, is people began offering me a second cup of tea. While the water was not running, 1 cup, and that too, it was small. When the water began to run, have another cup. We have milk, we have sugar, we have water. I'm thinking to myself, Jivan indeed. That is life. This resource runs the life here. It was true. It was absolutely true. And then in my very first project, after my PhD, with my very first ever graduate student, Jacqueline Cochrane, we remained in India because I was already comfortable there. I hadn't started working at other places yet. And this was another very important lesson for me for water. This is a rainwater harvesting structure. And rainwater harvesting is the kind of canonical community-based natural resource management. Everybody loves rainwater harvesting. Everybody contributes to it. Everybody is shown like digging with zealous joy in order to make the rainwater harvesting, structure sound and good, and everybody shares in it equally. And then there's all of this, backstory about rainwater harvesting. But what was interesting about Alwar, which is a hotbed of rainwater harvesting actually, is what they did was they had the rainwater harvested soak into the soil. They did not use it directly for drinking. They allowed it to recharge the aquifer, which is a shallow aquifer, and then when the water was running short or it was summer, no longer raining, they pumped it out so they could irrigate continually. Okay, that's what they did. And the thing that Jacqueline and I found was actually something quite puzzling, which was, why did everyone want to contribute to the rainwater harvesting structure even if they didn't have land? And even if they didn't have livestock? What's going on? Was there pressure? Did they feel force? And so we have spent a long time, mainly Jacqueline, I have to say, because everything I do, I owe to my students, you know. So mainly Jacqueline, I went down there just briefly. We talked in particular to the landless. And we found that the water in the village had for them a profound symbolic value. It was not just an agricultural commodity for livelihoods and their animals. It had a profound symbolic value. They said to us, it is dharam work, it is pious work. So we must contribute, because for pious deeds, nobody wants to be lower. Or for another person would say, animals drink there. I do not have cows and I do not have goats, but village animals live there and animals have the same soul. And after a few more months there, we tried to probe about other, what we would call common property resources, roads and schools and forests. Nothing had the power to bring people together and be a village and be a community. The fact that there was a common rainwater harvesting structure to which everybody had contributed to the best extent they could, made them, so to speak, a village and gave them their identity. And it's really because of these experiences in the rural and urban parts of India that by the time General Comment 15 came around, and by the time the SDGs had decided that they agreed with General Comment 15 with the UN, declaring safe and affordable water to be a human right, I felt that at this point, I was already steeped in that understanding. I had already felt it. I had already lived those nights and days. And this was the reason I took a turn away from development economics and agricultural economics. It's not because development economics and agricultural economists don't understand that water is a human right. Of course not. But it's not the lens through which the discipline looks at it. The lens through which economics looks at water is first and foremost a resource that we should protect, that we should conserve, that we should use wisely. But the lens through which I started looking at water was much beyond that. It was a resource, no doubt, necessary for food and crops and so on, but it felt to me much more like something that was the very foundation of life to people who were always running short or who had water, but it was really, really unclean. And it's that really made me do the turnaround that David spoke about. I started to think of water in a different way. So now let's look at water as a human right, the way the United Nations defines it. Let's look at it. What does it say? It says that safe and affordable water is a human right, and picking up from that understanding, Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is the water goal, says for Target 1, by 2030, universal and equitable, let's work with that, universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. So nobody is to be left behind. It should be safe, it should be drinkable, it should be affordable. This is what safe and affordable drinking water for all means as a human right. So it behooves us to now ask, well, how far away are we from this goal? Let's set the stage for the work I'm going to share with you. How far away are we from this laudable goal? We've made a lot of progress. I agree very much with George when he says we must honor the hard work of the people who have come before us. But we have still a long way to go. Okay? About 2 billion people, according to the World Health Organization and the UNICEF, who jointly monitor access to water and the safety of water, about 2 billion people lack safely managed water. That's the term the United Nations uses. Lack safely managed water, meaning do not have water that is accessible and or safe and or available when needed. And very large gaps exist between rural coverage and urban coverage, which is a very common phenomenon actually in the water world in many countries. So you can see that pattern here completely. It also means that this absence, lack of safe, accessible water available when needed, which is so often combined with lack of affordable and safe sanitation, very connected to water, and lack of hygiene connected to water. Together, water, sanitation, and hygiene are called the WASH sphere of inquiry. This absence of safe wash, not water alone, but water, sanitation, hygiene, often these absences, of course, are concurrent with one another. About 1 million deaths result from diarrheal diseases because of unsafe wash, mostly children under 5, every year. I do not wish to be known as a person who is given to quoting Stalin, but there is an insight Stalin allegedly had, where he said, one death is a human tragedy. 1 million becomes a statistic. And there is a core truth in that. There is a core truth in that. So I don't want to leave you with the statistic. Because what is 1 million? What is 2 million? How bad is that? What does it mean? So allow me to make it a little more concrete. The most terrible consequence of poor wash means, on average, in 1 hour, by the time George started to introduce the program, and I will have finished speaking, in the course of this lecture, on average, we will expect 114 children to have died. People to have died, mostly children, mostly under 5, of a 100% preventable disease. Water is another word for life. And that's not all. Those are not the only consequences of the lack of wash. It is often a long walk to water for many people. The WHO and the UNICEF have argued, have counted. I'm not really very sure how one can accurately count these things, but this is the best data we have, that about 263 million people walk or wait at least 30 minutes to get kind of safe water. We are not sure how super safe it is, but kind of safe, okay? And another 159 million collect water from completely unsafe sources to which they also have to walk. This picture I've showed you is on the back cover of this WHO UNICEF document. Let us note with care the gender of the person doing the pumping. Most of these waiters and workers are overwhelmingly women and girls in almost every country. It's a great hardship to have to carry water back and forth like this. You lose time for work, for childcare, from sleep. You lose your child's health because there are studies that show that your child's health suffers when the mother has to walk to water for a long time. But I want to move away a little bit. We discussed child health. I want to move away a little bit, not from child health to thinking about the woman's health. After all, when people say women and children, that's 2 categories. It is not 1 category. What do you mean women and children? Okay, that's 2 categories. So yes, child health suffers. That's a terrible thing. We've already seen that child health suffers because they are the ones most vulnerable to waterborne and water-washed diseases. But I want us to think about these girls and women traveling back and forth with water on their heads and on their hips. 1 liter of water weighs 2 pounds. 20 liters of water weighs 40 pounds. The World Health Organization wants every single person to have at least 20 liters of water per person per day. 5 people in the family, and you're up to 100 pounds. Is it possible for them to carry 100 pounds of water? They'll be fetching and carrying all day. Of course, they do not do it. So what do? They use much less water than is actually necessary for health and hygiene. You will underconsume if this is what you have to do to get water. It is inevitable. Okay? So we don't have actually any count of how many people underconsume because of this long and relentless walk to water, and think at what age they are starting. Think of how they are carrying that water. Not the girl with the bike, but the other 2 behind her. Okay? What is it doing to this part of your neck? I want to know, if you have to do this for 40 years. What is it doing to your knees and to your lower back? And I feel that the world of public health, we need to think of this kind of health as seriously as we think about waterborne and water-wash diseases. Because women and children are 2 categories and not 1. And this is a problem that happens in urban areas too. Do not think this is entirely confined to rural areas. We've shown in our work with Zach and Isha and a couple of other wonderful students I've had the fortune to work with, that the waiting job when water is intermittently supplied in most cities, which it is in most African and South Asian cities, when you don't exactly know when the water is to come, it's very similar to the canal situation. You're kind of waiting around for it to come, right? And then you kind of know, roughly speaking, it'll be Tuesday and Friday, but then you have to wait, and sometimes you have to wait in a long line because the tap's not in your home, it's a courtyard tap. So other people are waiting with their containers and their buckets, and you're waiting to fill it, and that can easily take 30 minutes or more in a day. Okay, so it's a lot, that the cost to not having this access, not having readily accessible safe water is really, really high. Really, really high, and is multidimensional and goes beyond just diarrheal diseases, serious though that may be. So now let me take you down the path of some of the work that we've done. One of the strategies that has been repeatedly emphasized, although its lack of scaling up has given everybody pause, but let's see how we got there. One of the things that we have thought about a lot in our community is, well, if they have access to water, but it's not clean and safe water, can there be possibilities of low-cost water treatment and storage for safe water access in your home? You get the water, it's not the best, it's not the finest, it wouldn't pass EPA standards, but can you treat it in some low-cost way in your home? And would that be acceptable? And would that work? So I now am going into a couple of my research projects based on this idea. And I don't want to go through project by project, paper by paper, but that's very boring. But I do want to just quickly go through what we found and then try to extract some sort of larger or meta results from about water and life from my work and the work of my students. So I will take us through 3 projects we've done on this theme. The first is in Mexico, and this work is with my former student Fermin Regadas and Josh Gruber, and the wonderful Cara Nelson, who is in CEE, and Jack Colford in public health. We did this work together. And this in Mexico, this was a system that was designed well to keep water safe. It's an ultraviolet lamp, which you can't see, it's below the blue table. And can you see the wrapped garrafon underneath it? So the water goes through, it can be poured from the top, then it goes through the UV lamp, it gets disinfected pretty effectively, and then it pours into the garrafon, and the garrafon has a nice narrow neck, so you don't have, children dipping their hands into it and so on, so you don't have a lot of recontamination risk. So we found in our work that when the system worked as designed, it actually kept water pretty safe and pretty clean, but which you want. So on the one hand, that's a great result, right? It's working. On the other hand, we also found it worked best when the members of the household were really well trained, when the system was kept very accessible in a readily usable room and protected from recontamination. But if any of these fell, like if the training wasn't good, or it wasn't well maintained, or it wasn't able to be protected from recontamination, ultraviolet light disinfection has no residual protection, unlike chlorine. Okay? And so it didn't work that well at keeping it effective. So there were many iterative rounds of designing the mesita, and we developed a simple design through which we tried to understand how water quality changed when you didn't have the UV tube versus you did have the mesita, and on balance, the efficaciousness was quite good. But that's not enough, right? It's great that it's efficacious. It's great that it's efficacious, but is it actually being used consistently and correctly in a way that water is being drunk exclusively from that safe source and not from 100 other sources at the same time, which would certainly attenuate any benefits you get from the safe water? And here, our next step, we experimented with two versions. We went by this interesting theory in behavioral economics called small hassles, where we said, okay, we're going to try to eliminate the difficulty of using this system, because every intervention is an intervention and it interrupts your daily flow. Okay, so we're going to try to reduce the small hassles, okay, and we're going to say, all right, we're going to have more checkups, we're going to have even more training, we're going to make it so that even the child in the family knows how to use the mesita soon. We're going to give them a second garrafon, because sometimes if it's nighttime and the garrafon water has run really low, are you really going to go out at that time and fetch more water and then pour it through the... No, you're not going to do that, okay? So let's have a second garrafon, so that's going to make it even easier for you to keep using it on a consistent basis. And for about 8 months, this extra training worked really, really well. And then came the decline. By the time we were in month 9 or 10, everything was back to sort of okay with the enhanced program, with all of our training and effort, not really doing much better by way of adoption and consistent use as the basic training program. And this was disappointing, but one of the things I understood, and this is what I want to go with with this first part of my projects, is that when systems call upon household members to do work, they call upon them to do work. When I turn on my tap in my kitchen, I really don't have to do anything other than fill my glass. But everything else, all of these intermediate technologies, as it were, because they don't have piped clean water, all of it requires you to do work. And sometimes, that work is just too hard. It's not hard because the work is hard. It's just one more damn thing. And life is already one damn thing after another. Okay? They just can't get there. It's not that they're not trained. What a relentless faith we have in constant education. It's not about the education. They so get it. They just can't get there. And that is something that we in the safe water community have to understand. Getting it and getting there are so not the same thing. They are so not the same thing, okay? And we find a not quite the same, as similar. I'll give you a second example of safe water options that I worked with wonderful colleagues in Tanzania's National Institute of Medical Research, and our Emory colleagues, Tom Clazen and Joe Brown, I think he's now at Georgetown, and Zach Burt, my former student, where we went to a very poor area. Mexico, after all, is a middle-income country, let's not forget. We went to a very poor area in rural Tanzania, and we experimentally tested what kind of approach to safe water, in-home safe water, a poor rural household would like to use, and what they could afford to pay for it. Now, why are we doing this? Because the Tanzanian government has declared, with a certain level of transparency, that they're not going to be building pipes out into the rural areas anytime soon. If they're not going to be building pipes out anytime into rural areas, and this is the kind of water source that people have, then what should we do at home to enhance the capacity of people to drink safer water than this untreated water? And that's how I got into the project, the Emory folks and myself. And so we said, okay, well, that's pretty sensible. You want to know what people will use, and you're willing to test what people will use, as opposed to plopping something from, on top of them from on high. Okay, yet another failure. So we tested 4 safe water options in rural Tanzania. One was filtered, these are ceramic filters. Then there was a chlorine disinfectant. Chlorine, is extremely effective, especially when the water is not turbid, but there can be no denying the fact that chlorine has a distinctive Perfume. Not all people are fond of drinking a swimming pool. Nevertheless, it is very effective, and so we tested it. Then there's pure disinfectant and flocculant, which gives a super weird taste, but works very well with turbid water. And some of the, water in Tanzania was pretty turbid, So we tried that. And then boiling. And boiling, we gave them these cook stoves. We gave them away. Because these are improved cook stoves, which generate a lot less household air pollution than the traditional 3-stone fires that they used. It doesn't quite get up to Kirk Smith's standard of LPG for everybody, but it was better than what they used, and we decided we could not ethically test a boiling solution while giving them a 3-stone fire to boil on. That was not okay, all right? So we gave them these, and we let them keep it regardless. So this project had 2 questions. One was each household received one of these, and then they tried them in rotation and so on. So let's get to our 2 questions. What did they like and use, and what could they afford to pay for it? Because in a poor country, cost recovery is an important fact, an important factor in the government deciding what it can do. So they liked 2 of them. Not very much to my surprise. Sometimes I find that I can kind of guess, but kind of guessing doesn't make for a paper, and it doesn't make for my students' PhD. So sometimes I have to rigorously prove what I kind of guessed, which can be slightly frustrating, but I kind of guessed that they wouldn't like the middle 2 pongy things. Well, who would? Okay? So they loved the ceramic filters, and they loved the cook stoves. And they loved the cook stoves extra because, and here's the second lesson, meta lesson, they already knew how to boil water. Who doesn't know how to boil water? It was a normal thing, okay? It was a normal thing, right? But what's the catch? The catch is the 2 they liked, they can't afford to pay for. The ones they can afford to pay for, they can't stand. Okay. And so this thing, what level of cost recovery, you have to ask yourself, can you really expect from really poor households with very few options and so many needs? What level of cost recovery can you really expect? And here was a situation where clearly what families preferred to do was totally at odds with what they could afford to buy. And when I say what they could afford to buy, they couldn't pay at a median level even 7% of the cost of the filter. Forget about anything more than that. Okay? So we've also worked with boiling in rural China, and this is with Alistair and Jack Colford and our wonderful colleagues from China CDC, where they boil water regularly. And here we tried to look for what kind of water quality improvements or what kind of home water treatments are the rural Chinese doing when they don't have safe water piped into their homes, but they have access to water. And what we found is that boiling is very common in China. We already knew that, actually. And so they were willing to boil. And boiling, let me go back for a second. No, sorry, I went forward by mistake. Boiling in this manner with biomass is, of course, terrible for household air pollution and for your lungs and so on. But when the water was boiled in electric kettles, it was actually really good and very important and interesting to a point to which I will return when I'm wrapping up. The boiled water in electric kettles was significantly more safe from contamination than the bottled water that was selling in those areas. Okay? And that is something that we want to remember and we want to bear in mind, because I want to return to that. And so based on this, as Alistair knows, we have an ongoing China project encouraging families that are not using electric kettles to use electric kettles, because boiling with electricity is completely different from boiling on firewood. So let me step back. What did I learn about water through these projects and others like it? And what did I learn about life? I want to share 3 lessons with you. I'm sure some of you have felt these and heard these yourself in your own work, in your own terms, but I want to tell you that this is what I learned from my water experiments and with all of my students and all of my faculty colleagues. The thing that I learned was low-income people really do need and really do want modest amounts of clean water. It's not that they don't understand that clean water is important, but it is extraordinarily hard for them to pay for what they want or to use what they can pay for. And we have to internalize that. in the water, electricity, fuel, whatever. We have to internalize that in the development community, I think, more than we have done in the past. 2, I have developed a total dislike of this word, behavior change. Public health, term rather, I shouldn't say word. Public health people use it, economists use it, nurses use it, nannies use it, okay? And it's actually a horrible term, because behavior change in the development business means that, behavior change is really hard. You do this, you do that, this education, this outreach, this free soap for 10 months, no free soap for 20 months. Okay, after the end of 20 months, everything goes downhill. Exactly what happened with our Mesita Asul. Exactly what happened with our Mesita Asul, okay? And then what's the lesson? Behavior change is hard. No, when you're truly poor, everything is hard. And one more intervention that requires 30 more minutes of your time is just too much. Everything is hard when you are poor, and we have to understand, therefore, that the context of our water, sanitation, and hygiene research cannot be water, sanitation, and hygiene systems. The context of that research and how to interpret the findings of that research is understanding the context of the life they lead. Otherwise, we will be doing them a disservice. Undoubtedly, we will be producing plenty of peer-reviewed papers, but it will be doing our clients, as I think of people in developing countries, a major disservice. I now want to move to the second piece that I wanted to discuss. We've discussed technology and water access, health and water access. I want to now discuss safe water access in the context of justice. And here we will go to the Central Valley. And I want to call out my student, Carolina Ballas. When Carolina Ballas first came to me, she wanted to work on small water systems in Brazil. And I thought, that's fabulous. Small water systems in Brazil cannot be that different from small water systems in India. I'm kind of a small water systems in developing countries person. Great. Okay, what does the girl do? She goes off and volunteers for the community water center for 2 summers. Life is transformed. She comes back. She wants to work on environmental justice in California. So I said to her, this is a noble calling. This is a noble topic. But last I checked, California was not a developing country. I don't have any expertise in California. This campus is lousy with people who have expertise in California. You go find one of them. I'm a developing person. I'm not doing California. So 2 weeks passed. Total silence at her end. I'm thinking, okay, Carolina's looking for someone better than me. She comes back. She's a very gently spoken, polite, and lovely person. But I will summarize in one line what she actually said to me that day without saying. What she said was, who are you to decide what is development and what is not development? Who are you to decide what is developing and not developing? If people are poor, if they are suffering, if they can't afford water, if they face social injustice, why is that less of a problem than Brazil? And because I had no answer, I had to take her on. There was no choice. 5 years later, with Carolina, Rachel Morello-Frosch from ESPM, and Alan Hubbard from the School of Public Health, we did work on arsenic and nitrates in California's Central Valley, and here is California's Central Valley. For those of you who, maybe many of you are already familiar with it, the main source of drinking water for unincorporated communities and for farming communities is the groundwater in these places. These are community water systems. The teeny ones serve only 30 to 50 families. The big ones are like Fresno, thousands of connections. Many of these communities are unincorporated for historic reasons, and 95% of them depend on groundwater for drinking. The population in these places is about 46% Latino and 40% or so other people of color. The nitrates levels in these wells range from 0 milligrams per liter to 400 milligrams per liter, and the maximum contaminant level is 45. So above 45, you're out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Okay, and arsenic, it's another whole story. The arsenic here ranges from 0 to 150 micrograms, grams per liter, and the MCL, the maximum contaminant level, is 10. So beyond 10, you're out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. But as you can see, several systems are indeed out of compliance, both for nitrates and for arsenic, and sometimes actually for both. So when we started this work, we wanted to look at whether there was a disproportionate connection between people of color, communities of color, and or Latino, and nitrates in the water. And immediately we faced a little bit of a polite backlash. And the polite backlash was of the following two types. One, this is primarily a problem of scale. Small-scale systems cannot afford mitigation, so this is not a problem of environmental justice. If at all you find a correlation, it's actually a problem of small scale. Two, these are local problems. There's no point looking at the whole of the Central Valley for some kind of structural issue. Local communities have their local problems, and you can't really expand beyond a couple of local problems to, some kind of structural EJ type of discussion or issue. We found that systems serving large percentages of Latinos and renters, which is a proxy for low wealth, really did have well water with higher nitrate levels. And this is actually completely understandable. The historic proximity of farm labor communities to agriculture, nitrates being a major side effect of agricultural runoff, many of these communities being unable to actually take part in the governance of their water systems, many of these communities living under regimes where you had to have title to property to serve on the water board. These were all, in little ways, death by 1,000 cuts, right? Keeping people away from actually playing an active governance role in their water systems and pushing back with as much effectiveness as they could. They did push back. They did push back. There were people who told us, do you know how long I've been doing this? Do you know how long I've been knocking on the water board's door? Since my dad was a farm worker, he was doing this. So there was pushback. But it was hard because they're small, isolated, poor, often not English-speaking communities of uncertain documentation. Now we come to arsenic, another lovely chemical. Okay? Communities of color and lower rates of home ownership again were correlated with greater chances of exceeding the maximum contaminant level. But this was kind of a puzzle, right? Because arsenic is in fact naturally occurring. I could explain to you why Latino farm worker communities are more likely to have nitrates. But how am I going to explain why they have arsenic? It's not a runoff situation. It's not anything the farmers are doing. Okay, and again, we face a lot of pushback. What do you mean by this correlation? Are you saying that someone is deliberately polluting the water here? We were not saying anything of that sort. We're pointing out this correlation and saying, here's a potential EJ problem that we need to look at. And the conclusion we came to was that small arsenic-laden systems with low-income residents just didn't have the resources to comply with the law. So better positioned systems, when they found arsenic in their system, were able to write proposals, get money from the state water board, right? Mitigate the arsenic, get technical help, buy financial and managerial capacity if they didn't have it in their own communities. Fresno can do that. But Tullyville and Plainville and Lunar and Alpau cannot do that, okay? And so they stayed with this joint burden of having arsenic and then getting slapped with a fine because the maximum contaminant levels had been exceeded, okay? So what did I learn about water and life from my Central Valley experience other than the extremely valuable lesson that Carolina taught me? I learned that history, I should have known this anyway, but I learned through my water work, history is not in the past. It's very much in the present. And if we look for technical ways out of it that ignore history, not that you shouldn't look for technology that is ameliorative, of course not, but if you look for ways that are ahistorical, if you resist knowing and understanding that despite progress, structural injustices remain. They're embedded in the structure. They're not intended to remain. but they're in the blood of the governance of water in California. If we try to not see that, oh, it's about scale, are you saying it's deliberate? Then we won't actually be able to understand why we see the correlations we see. And we won't be able to, in my view, alleviate these problems. Look at Exeter. This big city is Exeter. Tullyville is the little red guy. Tullyville has been trying to incorporate with Exeter, which has a nice, well-functioning water system, forever. Exeter has said it's too far. We don't want to stretch our pipes that far. I would like you, please, now to pay a little bit of attention to the bottom left-hand corner. Do you see that yellow thing? Exeter is expanding. Those are ranchette-style second homes. They're not Spanish-speaking farm laborers. So at that point, the pipes can be paid for. Okay? Consolidation is a huge political issue, and we will never understand why it happens, when it happens, why it doesn't happen, and when it doesn't happen with these small-scale systems, if we aren't able to look at it through a historical lens. So the question you can readily ask me then, okay, all right, what? Home systems aren't scaling up, community systems are struggling, poor don't have a lot of money, utilities don't have funding, what are we going to do about HDG 6? And that is a very, very good question, and I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I want to take you to the service chain, which you really don't have to look at in great detail. All I really want to say to you is this. If we look at our data from all of the countries for which we have data, we find there has been exactly one path to scaling up of safe and affordable water. And that is municipal and community-based, distributed or centralized storage, depending on the place, and a delivery mechanism for which the state takes some responsibility. Essentially, a regulated utility or a regulated mini-utility, ultimately culminating in a tap. That is what the data are telling us, you know. So I feel like after all this time, meandering in the safe water system world, I've come back to saying they matter, they are supplemental, they're extremely important, they need to be innovated, but at the end of the day, we cannot escape the good old-fashioned, sometimes inefficient, hold their feet to the fire utility. When you don't have that, the thing that is actually scaling up is not all of these things my colleagues and I have been working on. The thing that is actually scaling up is bottled water. That's what's filling in the gap, the lack of affordable and accessible water. Okay? Who pays? The consumer pays because it costs hundreds of more times than municipal water. Who pays? The environment pays because even recyclable bottles are landing up in the landfill, as we showed, and Alistair and I showed in our latest work on bottled water. And what is lost? Let me spend a second here. What is lost? When you don't expect the utility to do anything, when you think that, oh, it's a failed state, failure of the state, failed narrative, let's look for these alternatives that can bypass the state, because you can't rely on the state. What does the utility do? Let's look for these public-private partnerships, let's look for these safe water systems, let's look for cost recovery from these poor users, because that's a sustainable model. That all has its place. But there is no way on earth that is going to reach universal safe access for all by itself without Mr. or Ms. Utility. What will come in its place, and what we can see as coming in its place, is bottled water. And bottled water has many excellent characteristics. But affordability, when I last checked, was not one of them. This cannot be the path to safe and affordable drinking water for all. And therefore, my final lesson that I want to share with you is, though it is a huge challenge for utilities and communities to expand their piped water systems and provide basic treatment, and some terrains are truly hostile to miles and miles of pipe, and we might have to think about low to no cost delivery systems there in narrow-necked bottles. But without the state taking responsibility to go to scale for its citizens, we are not going to get to fulfill the human right to water safely and accessibly and affordably for all. It is not possible. So I want to say, as I end up, that I know what I'm saying is not easy. It's not a very palatable solution. It wasn't very palatable to me 20 years ago, to be honest with you. Because it won't be fast, it won't be cheap, it won't be easy, it will be political, it will be all these things. But standing before you here today, I see no other way to a sustainable and affordable water service, minimal water service for all. And therefore, I would say, my research over 25 years has taught me, we cannot not face this reality. It is essential, there is no other way, and water is another word for life.
Time for a couple of questions, so shout them out if you can't find the microphone.
Yes.